Hey everyone, thanks for watching. In this video, I'm going to show you how to draw an almond. So grab your pencils and let's get drawing. The first thing you need to know about drawing the almond is it is a bit of a oval-like shape, so we'll probably start something like this. It's somewhat curved at the end, but it goes to a bit of a point over here. Sometimes there's like a bit of a nub, and we'll kind of bring that around like that. That's probably the best way to represent the shape of an almond. It's not necessarily flat, but not necessarily round at the base either. Every almond's a little bit different. So that's the first thing you need to do when drawing an almond, is just develop the shape. Make sure you're happy with it before you continue. You don't want to be, keep erasing the outline of it. By the way, 80% of the world's almonds are grown from the state of California in the United States. So 80% of the almonds in the entire world come from the United States. The rest come from places like Spain and Australia. So you definitely want to think about that as well as I show you how to draw an almond. Also, almonds are grown on trees. And if you're wondering, I'm actually drawing one part of the almond. There's actually three parts to an almond. So like I said, almonds grow on trees, and the three parts to an almond are the hull, the shell, and the kernel. The hull is like I think it's a furry-like piece on the outside of the almond. The shell is something that protects the kernel, and the kernel is what I'm drawing. The kernel is what we're most familiar with if you kind of eat almonds or cook them or roast them or whatever. The kernel is the inside piece of the almond. So if you're curious about that, just look it up. But the hull, the shell, and the kernel are all the parts of the almond. I'm going to draw a light source coming from this side. So we'll kind of go darker as we go away, and we'll go lighter on this side. The trick to drawing the almond is really just developing some of the lines. So it's kind of hard to describe, verbally, but you kind of have these lines that kind of start from the top and move their way down, but they don't continue from top to bottom. You kind of have these different lines that exist in different places. So this is my best way to describe how to draw that. Like in a lot of other fruit videos or object videos, try to take the shape, the round shape, as we go through this. So this will really help you make this realistic as possible. So towards the bottom, you might find more curvature in these lines. And around the sides, you might find that there's more lines, and they tend to be a little closer together because there's a bit of, effect around those sides. So this is my best way to describe how to kind of put these lines together. Let's just fix this piece over here. Because although we're drawing some curvature to this, it's not a completely round piece. In fact, there's a bit of, not flat, but not round. This isn't a perfectly round piece right here by any means. So as we draw these lines, you just need to kind of keep in mind that we're going to reference these lines and kind of creating a bit of shading around them. So so continuing on, we're just going to add a little bit of shading around each of these lines. And so follow along. I'm actually going to just switch up to a 5B. I think the 5B will be a little bit better for some of the shading. The other interesting fact about almonds that I looked up is almonds are self-incompatible, which means the pollen of one variety doesn't pollinate itself. So when you have an orchard of almonds, you have to have at least 2 or 3 different types of varieties. For cross-pollination, you have to have those different varieties pollinate themselves. And farmers rely on bees to move the pollen from one to another, from one variety to another. And sometimes there's actually no bees, or a farmer is not sure if the bees are really going to be around. So farmers often rent bees or pay for the usage of bees in order to get these almonds pollinated in I think it's a 6-week time span in which the pollination occurs. So kind of interesting, very, very interesting with that respect. So again, in another video too, we referenced how important bees are. So bees, very, very important. You should never kill a bee. You should always try to let it go if you can. They're very important to the world. And I think there's a bee shortage. There's even a really good documentary put out about bees as well. So I would encourage you to check that out as well if you haven't done so. So we're just adding some shading around some of these lines. And what I would say at this point is just use your smudge technique, whatever technique you like, and let it bleed into this paper, let it bleed into the drawing. You don't necessarily want it standing out too much. These lines can and should kind of become one with this object that we're creating, and that's kind of why I would suggest doing that. Okay, we'll jump over to a 7B, and I'm just going to quickly sharpen this. Not to a fine point, but just enough to get a little bit of lead visible there. I'm going to actually follow through and just get a little more shading around this almond. Around the outer part, I want to just use my 7B and just continue to kind of let some of these tones exist. So I'm just going to very ever so slightly let the lead kind of exist on this page. And you can see I'm just doing this as much as possible in the shape of the almond, as well as considering the light source coming over here, which I mentioned earlier. Okay, so I'm going to keep doing that. Follow along. Let us know if you're drawing this as well. Are you drawing it as we draw? Are you just watching? Either way, we're happy to have you. So thanks so much. Leave a comment below. Let us know how it's going for you. Okay. So I did the first part of the foundation of the shading. I want to get a finer point pencil now. It could be anything like an H or something like that. And just kind of realign some of these lines that I created because they have started to disappear. And that's okay. What I would say is draw your fine point line on one side of these shadows because you want to kind of create an effect when you kind of put this together. Some of these are a little harder to see on this side, so don't worry about that. If you can't see them, just try your best to find them, and if not, you can always go back and kind of redraw some of those shapes on there. The fine point is really important because it really helps define some of these lines. And if you look at an almond, just Google a shape or a picture or anything like that, you'll see these lines are very fine, and they actually they're very important to define them. Okay, so that's what we're doing. I'm not going to rush this, so I'm going to be patient. I'm going to take my time and make sure I do this properly. Okay. Wait a couple down here as well. Remember, the ones at the bottom are sometimes closer together and a little more frequent as well. Okay. So starting to pull this all together, I'm going to switch back over to a 5B. Just kind of fix up some of the shading that was existing around here and just make sure that this does look as realistic as possible. So I want to make sure that I kind of represent that as well. And I'd really like to make sure that these are more visible as well. We use the fine point pencil to kind of redraw these, but I'm feeling that they should look just a little more representative of that almond-like shape. So we're going to try to just kind of get them showing just a little bit more, and then we're going to use our smudge technique to kind of put this back together. Okay. In fact, I would kind of like to move to an 8B at this point and just kind of just get a little more lead on this. I think it'll show a lot better, and you'll see in a second as well. There we go. See, you can kind of see that this is looking it's a lot more realistic, really, and just get a lot more shading around the outside as well. So Let's do that over here. Great. The other interesting fact about almonds is that the green almond, which is kind of common or fancy or sometimes considered a delicacy, and not delicacy, but like common in fine dining restaurants, the green almond is really just an unripe almond. So an almond that has just not really ripened at the moment. So if you ever see a green almond, you're wondering like what's so fancy about it. It's really just an almond that hasn't really ripened yet. So that's kind of, it's all a green almond really is. If you're wondering like what's so special about it, or you know what's the big deal, that's it. I would say the trickiest part about drawing an almond is just getting these lines to look as realistic as possible. Even for myself, I still have trouble making sure that they do look as realistic as possible. And my, suggestion to you is just keep touching up these lines until you're happy with them. Keep touching up these lines until you're really, satisfied with the look and the shape. And sometimes they don't always come out how we want, but there's nothing wrong with continuing to kind of add more lines to it and characters. So if you notice, I kind of went back and forth a little bit. I might just grab something like a 3B over here and just add, again, some finer points to these, to some of this, these lines that exist. Okay. And the other reason you want to use a finer, pencil is because an almond also has a lot of little lines that exist around some of these divots. So towards the end of your drawing, like I'm doing right now, you might want to add in a lot of these like kind of veiny like lines that kind of go through. And this is kind of what pulls this drawing together. So, so make sure you have your fine point pencils with you as well. I know some people like to even use a mechanical pencil for getting some of these lines on there. So if you're doing that as well, that's great. Whatever works for you. We're aware there's so many different tools out there, isn't there? So we're just going to continue, just kind of continuing to kind of clean this up and just make sure that it's looking as good as we can. By no means do we need to rush it or anything like that. So let's keep this going. The other thing that you want to avoid when drawing an almond is a wider dark spot. The dark spots are very lengthy, just like these little thin lines over here. So if you ever notice that your lines are somewhat wide, or they're too wide, or they're just not looking right, take your pencil and just go top to bottom, just up and down like this. You can extend these lines even a little further, and try to make it look like they're kind of brushed onto each other like that. So that's what I'm actually doing right now. I kind of felt like they were a little wide. They weren't really looking to my liking. And if you've ever watched some of the other videos, you know that I'm not afraid to kind of clean things up or fix things. So we're not really about perfection on this channel. It's really just about using art to express ourselves and kind of create something. I was always artistic as a kid, always kind of creative, and always kind of interested in how things work or how things come together, or facts and interesting points. So, the thought of kind of creating a channel to, share some of these facts as well was always intriguing to me. So kind of the Intrigue Me kind of name came to be. And hopefully you're enjoying it. So let us know in the comments. Let us know if you're enjoying the channel, the style, the videos, and all of that good stuff, okay? So we're just gonna keep touching up some of our shading here. And you can kind of see I went back to my fine point pencil to further expand upon some of these darker spots and pulling out the shape with the fine point, kind of letting it grow, if you will, letting these kind of darker divots in the almond kind of grow out and being pulled out lengthwise. So you can kind of see they kind of go from top to bottom, they kind of go up here. You also want to make the outline of your almond nice and clear as well. So I just did that. Okay. Now I would say like you can kind of continue to smudge a bit. You don't want to smudge too much at this point because you do have your fine point pencil that's been used, and it could kind of impact some of the lighter lines that you draw. And if it does, don't be afraid to just redraw them. I know it's not really fun to keep doing this again and again and again, but it does really make for a really good drawing. So that's what I'm doing right now. Okay. I think the last interesting point I have for you about almonds and the almond tree is that almonds aren't actually hand-picked off the tree. I think it would just take far too long. There's actually a machine that shakes the tree, and the machine's called the shaker, believe it or not, and the almonds simply fall to the ground. But that only happens once the hull's split open, right? So remember, the hull was that furry part on the outside. So once the hull's split open naturally, there's a shaker that shakes the tree and the almonds fall to the ground. So if you're wondering, almonds are not hand-picked from the tree. There's actually a shaker that shakes it, and they fall to the ground, and I guess they just, they actually lay out in the orchard to dry. So the sun will kind of dry them out, and then a machine comes by and picks them up. Actually, the machine that comes by kind of sweeps them up, and the machine is called the sweeper. So really clever names for the machines, isn't it? Of course, there could be different ways that it's done. That's kind of the most common or the most popular way that these things are done. So we're kind of done. I would just say, like any drawing we do here, just finish up some of the lines on the outside, and that's what I'm doing here. Just make sure that you're happy with that result. So I would just do that over there. Make sure this is to my liking. And I'm kind of meticulous with this, but I would really say that a lot of the little tiny lines is what makes that almond. So I noticed that a lot of them disappear whenever you do a smudge, which I was trying not to do. You would be best advised to kind of just, to finish off your drawing, make sure that those fine point lines are still there. If they're not, just go back like I'm doing right here and just redraw them, and don't be afraid to really extend them. The almond really does kind of continue from top to bottom, from up to down, and it's nice. It's nice to kind of see that all come together. In the darker spots, they are still there. They might not be as visible, but don't be afraid to just put them in. You might still find that it helps create like that nice realistic drawing as a result, right? Okay, so that's, for the most part, like, that's pretty much it. The lines are not always uniform. They're not always in the same direction, so they're sometimes a little bit side to side. So if you can tell, I'm just trying to create just a little more variation in the way some of this has come together. I don't want it to look like everything is just from side to side. So just my last kind of way to touch this up, and then we'll kind of finish this off. So follow along. I'm just gonna lastly just kind of clean this up in that respect. So in doing that, you might feel like you want to just have some shading that just kind of, not necessarily from top to bottom, but just have some of that shading exist side to side a little bit as well. And that could just be as simple as just getting some jaggedy kind of shading that exists like that, and just kind of let that kind of flow into each other, right? So that's all I really just did right there. You could kind of finish it off by just using your smudge technique to kind of finish that off yourself. But that's pretty much it. I'm pretty happy with this. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. and the interesting facts about almonds. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.